VC funding ecosystems and investment strategies. Or, what is venture capital? Let's start by answering some basic questions that some of you may be asking, like, what is venture capital? And how do venture capital funds operate? What are the steps involved in a VC investment process? Once you understand the investment process, you'll be able to better prepare and engage with investors. Let's define what venture capital is. Venture capital begins with the word venture, which is defined as a risky or daring journey or undertaking for a particularly great reward. Startups are considered exactly that, high-risk investments, trying to achieve the near impossible. Charting new ground with new technology or other innovation. Creating or capturing a huge market with a product or service that solves a huge pain for its customers, that customers are willing to buy, find, activate, use, and tell their friends about. If all of that happens right, and you have your economics right, you have a huge winner. But most ideas about creating a huge venture don't pan out. 1,000 things can get in the way. In fact, much of the content of Venture Basecamp is about defining and hopefully avoiding or eliminating those things that get in the way for most entrepreneurs. But the reality still exists that less than 25% of the best ideas run by the best entrepreneurs will succeed. So no matter what you do, this is a big risk. This is what venture capitalists are thinking about. They get this. Yet they still invest. They invest where no one else will, like banks. And they invest for equity rather than more traditional form of, let's say, debt financing with collateral and other safety elements that a bank would ask. They do this because they're looking for more than principal and interest. They're looking for the kind of reward that a great explorer or adventurer would get. They're treasure hunters, and you and your startup are the treasure. Venture capitalists are experienced and successful. They've done this a bunch of times before. They know how to play the odds. They're long-term investors, accepting that an investment could take 5, 7, 10 years or longer. I had an investment in a company that's now called T-Mobile in the US. It was a 15-year investment. Luckily, it returned over 100 times the invested capital, but it was a long wait. At the same time, venture capitalists understand that a lot of their investments will fail or generate a small return. To offset the losses in poor returning investments, they're counting on a few big wins. That's why they won't seriously look at your investment unless you can be a big win. If they don't see that possibility, they'll walk away. That may seem crazy to you. Many entrepreneurs say, wait a minute, if I can generate a 3x return on your capital, that's a pretty good bet. Why aren't you investing? The answer doesn't have to do with you. It has to do with the statistics in the VC world. VCs need each opportunity to have at least a 10x return to make up for those investments that don't work out or fail. 95% of all investments don't hit their projections. They don't hit their numbers, their forecasts. On average, the successful ones do about 30 to 50% of the expected results that entrepreneurs talk about. So if you predicted a 3x return and you do 30% of the perspective that you gave, the projections that you gave, you'll barely be able to pay back the principal of the investment. This is simply the way the industry thinks and operates. You'll hear a lot about venture capitalists following patterns. They learn what works and what doesn't. Then, when you see things that are new, you can map them against experiences. That's what they do. This is why many of them don't invest outside of their experience window. They'll often tell you, that's not in my wheelhouse, meaning they don't have experience in that particular space. I've been involved in cellular telephony for over 45 years. I have seen hundreds of potential investments in mobile. Now when I see one, most of the time I've seen it maybe 10, 20, 50 times before. I can discern what's really new and innovative versus what an idealistic entrepreneur might imagine being so. I also know when I see a real, new, novel, and breakthrough innovation. I can match that up against the risk assessment of the entrepreneurial team and their ability to execute against all odds. It's also important that you're aware of the difference between a lifestyle business and a startup. I've talked about this before. It's important because while a VC expects 10 times and hopes for 100 times, maybe even 500 times their money, that's not possible in a lifestyle business. Don't get me wrong, you may be building a great, solid lifestyle business, but it just isn't a VC-backed business. It's better to learn this now, early. In the VC world, investors think about big wins. They talk about the investments of how a $50,000 investment in Amazon yielded $500 million a few years later. Well, a couple of decades later. By the way, it's worth $3.8 billion now. $50,000. Pretty exciting. So the possibility's there. But it's these very few global super successes that are talked about and that entrepreneurs think about. Oh gosh, that's great. I should be able to get that investment in my startup and do the same thing. And that's where you'll start having unrealistic expectations for your startup. Remember, you're one of an average of 543,000 new businesses started every month. Amazon and the others you hear about in the magazines are 1 in 100 million. So stay real, stay grounded. It's a long and hard process.